So we are the Waterdrops group. The Waterdrops project is intended to break down social barriers by integrating and immersing a diverse group of individuals in courageous conversations and team-building activities. The name Waterdrops stems from the concept that individual water droplets can bound together to make cracks in the so-called social barrier, creating progressive change as opposed to expecting a sudden and drastic flood to arrive and break down the barrier all at once.
So this project will involve gathering 4 students from 5 schools surrounding the Columbus area, and these students will participate in a series of workshops involving courageous conversation and activities that will help participants gain a better understanding of the 2 essential questions that we have. How do we react to people we don't understand, and what is the benefit of gaining a better understanding of others? And these questions can be answered indirectly through discussion of other topics such as race, identity, power and privilege, etc.
So the end result will be, I'll click it. So the end result will be 3 different things: a series of workshops for students, a collaborative public art piece, and a documentary film about the project.
So take place over an hopefully additional 3 years. Next year will be another planning year, looking at grant writing and researching potential sponsors. The second year will be starting the workshops and educating about the creation of murals and the documentary filming. And finally, the 4th year will be more workshops and finalizing the documentary as well as the mural and post-production. So we have a video to kind of reiterate what we just explained.
The Waterdrops project is intended to break down social barriers by integrating and immersing a diverse group of individuals in courageous conversations and team-building activities. The name Waterdrops stems from the concept that individual water droplets can bound together to make cracks in the so-called social barrier, creating progressive change as opposed to expecting a sudden and drastic flood to arrive and break down the barrier all at once. This is a multi-year project divided into 3 stages, each lasting 1 year. The preliminary year will consist of planning, raising funds, and recruiting students and schools to join. In the 2nd and 3rd year, the students from different areas within Columbus will come together to hold courageous conversations, which will cover topics including race, socioeconomic status, LGBTQ+, sexuality, and many more. The overarching essential questions include: how do we react to people we don't understand? And what is the benefit of gaining a better understanding of others? This process will result in a film documentary as well as a collaborative public art piece. The result of this project will not only benefit the students involved, but should provide a reference to build a space that comprises respect, fairness, and most importantly, a sense of belonging.
So my individual purpose in this project was to work on the workshop content and build a foundation for the curriculum. So since these students will be relatively unfamiliar with each other, I first looked at developing a list of communal agreements and ground rules for the workshops. So some of the examples of the list I have is: be fully present and engaged, try to speak from the I perspective, lean into discomfort, listen and process, accept conflict and its resolution as a necessary catalyst for learning. Additionally, I looked at some activities called icebreakers, which will help students introduce themselves and become more comfortable with the students that they'll be working with. One example I like to say is my fullest name. Students will be asked to write down their full name on a piece of paper, describe the story behind their name, maybe the ethnicity, and 2 identities that they feel they relate most closely with. I additionally researched some topics and activities that will cover race and power and privilege and the list that I mentioned before. And with the help of Mr. Jones and Ms. Robbins, I looked at potential resources for the workshops, speakers that are all around the country. And we did have the privilege to have some visiting speakers come. One that had a very big impact on me, I think, was Brendan Keeley. He's the author of All American Boys and Tradition, and he gave me some insight that I think is really helpful for the workshops. One thing that he said was hold each other's stories with a listening heart and tell each other's stories in the I perspective. And I think that this will help students gain more empathy and just a better understanding of others. He also mentioned that to recognize discomfort and progress instead of focusing on an end goal, and being able to resonate and sit in the middle instead of just allowing for progressive change.
So I'm Ryan. I did the communication part of this. Overall, my point of this project was to take all the information that they have gathered and put it into emails and phone calls and talks and give it to the other schools so that they know what we're doing and how they can be involved. So one of the first things that we had to do was we had to figure out whether these schools were going to be an active, like, were they going to just contribute the people to the project, or were they going to be an active, like, having their counselors involved? Were they going to send representatives over? How were they going to be involved? So we had to figure out that first. And then we found 4 schools, which are Upper Arlington High School, Bishop Ready High School, Pickerington High School, and Columbus North International. And these 4 were chosen for specifically because Upper Arlington, because they were different from Wellington. Because Upper Arlington High School, it is similar, but also it's a public school, so you get a different experience from them. Bishop Ready is a religious school, which is again a different experience from Wellington. Pickerington High School is outside of 270, so again that's very different from what we get at Wellington in Upper Arlington. And then Columbus North International, because they have a very, very large population of international students, which would be interesting to get their perspectives in the workshops. And then one of the other ones was we all made a version of an elevator speech to give to kind of like focus in what we wanted to do on the project, to explain it, because when we kind of explained it, it's a very big, wide area. So we basically condensed it down to like 30 seconds of like, this is what we're doing, and if you're interested, contact us here. So this ended up, I sent out emails to the 4 schools, to the counselors of each school, to kind of like see if they were interested in the project. The response I got was good. People seemed interested in the project. I even got I had a phone call with one of the counselors from Pickerington Central, and they said that they were interested in the project and they wanted to stay updated on what was happening, and when we are ready to like formally kind of get them involved in the project, when they will be able to do that.
So my portion of the project was the finance portion, in particular grant writing. And so coming into the year, I knew absolutely nothing about grant writing or really what a grant was. But with the help of Wellington faculty, and especially Mr. Adian Singh, Evan's dad, I really was able to gain real understanding on what a grant was and how to write one. And so some things that we focused on was where to look for potential grants and how to properly apply for potential grants. And Mr. Adian Singh particularly helped with that. He even had a big packet that I still have about how to formulate a grant and how specifically to write a grant. And one of the things that he really touched on was in order to write a grant and in order to expect to receive a grant, you have to be for the project completely ready, and the companies and the organizations and the foundations need to know exactly where their money is going to and exactly what kind of change or what kind of progress is going to be made with that. And then working underneath the Wellington umbrella, so since we are a club organization in Wellington, we need to know how the overall school and the overall Wellington brand plays into our project. And so who to ask for money. We looked at places like the Benedict Foundation, the Greater Columbus Arts Council, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and then discussed applying for grants as a member of the Wellington School. So what we discussed was, are we going to apply for grants as Wellington, or are we going to apply for grants as the Waterdrops project? And that's still up in the air, as it's kind of a really difficult and loaded question from that perspective, with just public-private institutions and things of that matter.
So my portion was the legal requirements and things that would have to be taken care of to make sure the project would be able to run smoothly. So in the beginning, I was like excited to be able to take care of a task this important, but it was actually very hard to find information because I did a lot of research and found out as much as I could about the requirements for this, but the majority of the information I found was only public schools, which was helpful, but it wasn't that helpful because Wellington is a private school and we're the main school like doing this project. So I needed more information surrounding private schools, so I went to Dr. Gerwin, and he just sent me to Danielle Turkovich, who is the marketing director at Wellington, and she basically told me that like all I could do right now, because we weren't starting yet, was make sure that everyone had a release form signed so they could be filmed. So that wasn't very helpful because I needed to know about what we had to do to get to the filming point. So I went to Allie to ask her if she could find anything, and that was also hard for her to find stuff. So really what I did was I just found release forms, and then I feel like what I would have had to do as the project went on would have been more surrounding transportation and getting like places to do the workshop sessions. So I was kind of disappointed with how my portion of the project went this year, but I feel like next year I'm taking over for Ben for the finance part, so I feel like I'll be able to handle that a lot better.
So what drove me to this project was the documentary and film aspect. I've had an interest in film for a while now. So I started to do some research at the beginning of the year and throughout the year about how you would go about making a documentary and creating this type of film. So one of the biggest points that came up in my research was cultural difference. So there's going to be cultural difference in the film's directors, viewers, and subjects and so on. So it's important to include these different aspects and perspectives and utilize them to make a true documentary that includes a variety of perspectives. Another major point is the digression of characters in a documentary. So I'm assuming a lot of people in here have seen a documentary before. So a lot of the time what happens is you kind of like see a group of people that they're focusing on maybe, and then it kind of zones in on maybe a smaller group of people and starts to interview those people, and that's what I would identify as characters in the documentary making process. It's kind of the digression of these individual characters to create a bigger storyline and kind of fill in those blanks. So it's the job of the filmmaker to develop and construct characters on screen. And something very important to remember about documentaries is that they are not only a presentation of reality, but a representation of it. And then one other thing is acknowledging the time on screen and how that works. So one thing that needs to happen is find out if your documentary will make more sense in chronological order or in an order that kind of sets up a hook and then kind of develops that point as the story goes on. So that is extremely important to creating an interesting documentary. So I also found some very big do-nots for creating a documentary. So the first being having an obtrusive crew. So this kind of ruins the nature of documentary when you have an obtrusive crew, because basically what I mean by this is a crew that's telling your subjects or characters what to be doing, and kind of like telling them, putting more structure than there should be into interviews and things like that. So having an intrusive crew can impose bias and make it unnatural, which is kind of goes against the very nature of a documentary. Another important don't is to not have poor interview technique. This may seem kind of obvious, but the interview technique is what is going to create a storyline for your documentary. So having an interview technique that is good and that you can really dig into characters' personality is what you need in order to create that storyline and create a good documentary. Lastly, pre-production plans are extremely important in creating a documentary, because if you don't have it in entirely planned out, then you could miss something, and you can't really miss something in something as real as a documentary, because it's so real and it's real life. So if you miss something, then you know the story can come out flawed, and so yeah, you need to have a good pre-production plan in place. So yeah, that is all that I have for making a documentary. Right, and then moving forward, so next year we're hoping to kind of test out the project within Wellington and see how that works out, and then tweak our flaws, see how we can improve, try again, have a few trial runs, and then maybe in future years, as in after next year, we can start branching out and recognizing or bringing in other schools for the project, which was the original idea. But we realized this year that we might need to take a step back with a project of this caliber. When you want to include so many schools, it can be difficult to kind of get all of that going and ball rolling and put everything together. So we're gonna try testing it out next year, just within Wellington, see how that works, improve our technique, and come at it again in 2 years.
Wonderful, thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for the Waterdrops group, any of the aspects of the project at this point?
As far as the participants, I know you said you were gonna get other schools, but if you're gonna just do it in Wellington, what's your thought of, you looking for certain people, gonna recruit them,
Well,
volunteers?
We have a pretty diverse community, I think, just within Wellington itself. So we're kind of trying, I think at first to try this out in the upper school at least, and kind of make it an all-inclusive thing, so something that everybody can participate in.
And if it were to move out into the other schools, there would be like a short application. So it would be for students that have a particular interest in participating and not just random